Would you like to experience a shift in your career? You may be frustrated to see the same workplace patterns repeat or feel that work lacks purpose, respect, or compensation. To get relief, you may have talked with friends or family, read books, watched YouTube, or taken courses. All good strategies if you get unstuck quickly and move towards your goal. But if you're frustrated with your progress, you need an expert guide to become the hero of your own work story. And that's where I come in. My name is Marie Gervais, and I help people move from work trauma to career transformation. With a doctorate in culture and learning in the workplace, certification in emotional freedom coaching, and as a training and development professional, I've helped hundreds of stuck career professionals gain new insights and release what is not serving them. So if you're ready to turn wishful thinking into a meaningful, well-compensated career and are hungry to experience the power of coaching to get you there, let's talk. Get a taste of what career success could be for you. Go to trycoaching.link/biz. Biz is spelled BIS. See you there. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. I'm really happy to present to you today Prerika Agarwal, who is the founder of Inspiration Careers. She has 18 plus years of leadership experience at Fortune 500 companies and has built a career in technology and management consulting. She coaches women who want to take that next big leap in their career and has coached over 150 clients using her unique mindset meets strategy methodology. Her core philosophy is to empower women to design careers that light them up, write books, start their own businesses, and make more money. Her mission is to help as many women as possible step into being the CEO of their own lives by not staying stuck in the sunk costs of the past and old stories of who you are. So welcome, Prerika. So nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for that fantastic introduction, Marie.
So Prerika, tell us a little bit about who you are personally, because that was the professional bio.
Yeah, so who I am personally is I live in Washington, D.C. I've been here for 5 years. I really, really adore this city. It is beautiful and clean and multicultural. And I grew up in New York City. So that's where I'm from. My background is that I'm Indian. I'm born to Indian parents, and I enjoy travel. That is my life's passion. So I have been to over 48 countries, and each year I make sure that I'm taking at least 3 international trips to new places that I've never been.
That's pretty exciting. And were you still able to do that during COVID?
So, of course, during COVID, that was very, very limited. And I think I only managed to do maybe 2 international trips when things got safe and once I was vaccinated. But I am back on having the travel bug. And so I spent a month in France this year as well. I was actually thinking about moving there because what I do, I can do from anywhere in the world. And I think it's so exciting to be able to live in different places and experience the culture and really create from that place.
Yeah, exciting and challenging because visiting and living are not the same thing.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. So I loved, again, France is wonderful. This was my 6th time going there, but as a resident and actually renting an apartment and buying groceries and doing all of that, I decided it was a very different experience and that was not going to be, my next home. So I have moved back to the States and here I am.
I see. Did you have siblings when you were growing up?
I did. So I have a younger brother and it's just the 2 of us and he is 6 years younger than I am.
Are you in similar industries?
We're not actually. I feel like it's very interesting because it's almost like we don't have the same parents, I would say, or same upbringing. He is in a very different path of his life. He's married, he has a child, he works in the IT field. My background is management consulting and strategy, and now executive coaching. So we're in different stages of our lives.
Right. You may find you merge, as I did with my sister over the years. It's kind of interesting how these things happen. You start on different ends and then you end up finding a point of commonality career-wise. Not all families do that, but a lot of them seem to.
That's so interesting. Yeah, sometimes you weave in and out of each other's lives, and I think that there can be similarities. But yeah, at this point, I think we're on different journeys and maybe it'll cross again in terms of where we are in our careers.
Mm-hmm. So, can you share a couple of incidents from your childhood that you think made you into the person you are today?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say the biggest, sort of incident or challenge for me was at 11 years old, we moved from Queens to Long Island because my parents wanted to move into a bigger house and they also wanted us to go to a much better school district. And this was a huge turning point for me, Marie, because really I felt like my whole life changed. So for those listeners who don't know much about Queens, Queens is ethnically and in every other sense, very, very diverse. I remember growing up in my class, there would be representation from 20 different countries and so many different types of cultures and people and religion. And you were exposed to so much at a very young age. And once we moved out into the suburbs, it was completely different. I was in a much smaller school. My class only had, like, the total grade only had 89 students. And I was the only brown person. I was the only Indian person in my class. And I really stuck out, like there was no going around that. I was very different. I looked different. I dressed differently. I didn't have the LL Bean backpack. I didn't know what J. Crew was. So this was a whole new world. And my focus really shifted from, I think, having fun and being free and really being a kid to how do I fit in? How do I blend in? And how do I become quote unquote normal?
Hmm.
So the way that I did that, the only way that I knew, and this whole podcast is about culture, is I come from a culture, whether it's familial, whether it's because I'm Indian, of excellence. Whatever you do, you're going to do it the best. If there is a test, you're going to be getting an A on that test, and everything you do is with excellence. And so when I moved to this new school, to avoid being alienated, I threw myself into my schoolwork. I joined every single academic club and activity I possibly could. And I was part of 13 different clubs and activities, right? So this really, all of these things shaped who I am, because from that young age, I think there was programming and belief that to be valuable and to create worth, I had to do a lot of different things. I had to keep myself busy, that I couldn't rest. There was no time for relaxation.
Right. So that is common in a lot of the people that I interview because they're really driven for excellence. Their entrepreneurs tend to be driven and people who are the heads of companies. And they find, as they've been doing that for a while, that it takes a toll on their health or their relationships, the quality of their life. Did you notice anything like that happening?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the trickiest part here is that you may not know that it's happening. So in my case, it took a couple of, I think, shakes for me to realize what was causing all of the distress and some health issues that I came up with. So the first time kind of I was shaken out of this, I was working for KPMG. I was an analyst, fantastic job, thrilled to be there. And I started developing at the age of 21, some gallbladder issues. They were so severe. I had gone in for multiple medical exams, surgery. There was lots of things going on. And I never thought in a million years it was because I was stressed. Because if anybody asked me, I wasn't stressed. This was normal. It was normal for me in high school to be working till 8 or 9 p.m., to be working on the weekends, to be doing activities. And so for me in my job, which was now mostly 9 to 5, of course, I wasn't stressed. So I did whatever the doctor said I needed to do, went through the surgeries. I think I changed my eating habits a little bit. And then again, when I was around 27 or 28, I was again experiencing a lot of health issues. I had gained about 40 pounds. I was tired all the time. I didn't know what was going on. And again, I never thought it could be stress. That's obviously not the reason. And so what I decided to do is go and take a, healing retreat. I went off to a center for about a month in India, did all of these holistic healing treatments and yoga and breathing exercises and acupuncture. And I did start feeling better. So I thought, okay, that's probably it. And then I would say my final transformation came in when I was 35 years old. This is post MBA. I was in a fantastic career in management consulting. That's what I always wanted to do. And this is where, Marie, my life really started falling apart. I was engaged to a fantastic person. My engagement was starting to fall apart. I didn't know what was going on. And I could really this time feel the stress. I wasn't health wise, I wasn't doing well. My relationship was falling apart. Actually, things at work also weren't great either. I wasn't loving what I was doing in terms of like the people. I wasn't getting along with them. All of these things were happening. And somebody who was really close to me recommended that I do this personal development seminar called Landmark. I was shocked. I was like, okay, I know I'm having problems, but there's nothing wrong with me. And what am I going to learn in this personal development and leadership seminar? But that really transformed my life. Those 3.5 days of intense work and really looking at myself and what was going on and looking at my priorities and where I was spending my time, I realized nothing was aligned. I was saying that my priority were my friends and my family and my relationship, but I was spending all of my time at work, and it wasn't high quality work. It was a lot of busy work. It was lots of things that were not moving the needle. And so it was a really good, hard look at myself and what I'd been doing. And, the fact that I was just keeping myself busy, just like I did in high school and just like I learned to do, I would say, all throughout my childhood.
Because when you're busy, you can avoid the emotional pain.
Absolutely. It is such a buffering mechanism. I know that terminology now and that word now, but yes, as long as I was occupied, as long as I felt like I was doing things, I didn't have to look at what was missing or what was broken or not working.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is more about your young adulthood, like the incident that you started out with. Was that high school or was that when you were in primary school?
So it was somewhere in the middle. I was 11 years old and I had just started 8th grade. So
I
middle
see.
school. And that's really, I think, what kicked it off because before that, I was just a regular happy go lucky kid. I did fine in school. I was still doing well, but I was never focused on trying to be the best or being the smartest just to have that feeling of belonging.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently came across a statistic that said that when people are rejected in a social situation, it has the same effect as death on them.
Wow.
And so when you think about people leaving others out or just assuming that someone who doesn't look or sound like you or act like you, that they're not worth your time, it's like murder in a way.
Yeah. And I never thought it was anybody else's fault. That's the thing as a child, you internalize everything. And so at 11 years old, I was like, it's me. There's something that I'm doing wrong. And so let me be super proactive and fix it. And I'll force myself to belong because if I'm part of 13 different clubs and activities, they have to talk to me.
Right.
I am a part of something. And so, yeah, that was my defense mechanism to get through that time. And it seemed like it was serving me well because I did have a lot of success in my life, Marie, and I did, go to a great school. I have an MBA from Georgetown. I'm so proud of those things. And I think that driven nature enabled that. But what I didn't realize is that I kept having these breakdowns because of this very thing. I kept attributing it to other things, like maybe it's health or this, but those were all the symptoms and not really the cause of what was going on. And it's all this cultural thoughts and beliefs that I created at 11 years old, really from 11 to 18, I would say, those formative, middle and high school years.
It's those beliefs that you had to be better and busier and more excellent than everybody else to be accepted. And probably your family would not have seen that as being an issue because for them, that was just showing excellence in education, which is so valued in Indian families.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they were like, this is wonderful. She is participating. And I always had, as a result, I did make the friends. So that's something that I want to say is, my strategy worked.
Your strategy worked because you just put yourself right in there and just started doing it.
Right.
I once spoke with a Rwandan woman who was telling me as soon as I landed here, she was talking about landing in Edmonton during the Rwandan genocide, and she was an airline stewardess, so she could leave anytime she wanted with her children and figure out some way to do things because she had that resource and that understanding. She landed in Edmonton. Actually, she went to 3 different places and thought, nope, this isn't it. Then she landed in Edmonton where I live. And she said, as soon as I landed on the runway, I looked out at all of the snow and I said, this is home. I love it here. And if 100 people tell me that I I don't belong, and one person says I do, I only believe that one person, and that's how I've been successful.
That is such a beautiful, beautiful way to think about things. And I love that. And, here's the thing, as an adult, Marie, I see belonging as such a different concept. And I've grown to realize, and this is my personal philosophy, is probably half the number of people that you meet may not like you. And that's okay. Actually, not everybody's going to like you, and that's totally fine. And you don't fit into their world. And, 50% may like you. And then from that, it sort of funnels out in terms of who becomes a close friend, who really becomes part of your inner circle, all of those things. But at the end of the day, what actually matters is what you think about yourself. And do you feel like you belong, regardless of what anybody else is doing? Because there's always going to be those people, unfortunately, who may make you feel otherwise. And it doesn't change even into adulthood, right? There's so many, different times that I can think, even in my corporate life or anywhere else, where I still sort of had that same feeling like I did when I was 11 years old of, maybe this isn't quite the right lunch table to be sitting at, or maybe I might be eating lunch alone. But at the end of the day, I remind myself, I'm not a little girl anymore, and I get to choose how I think about myself and how I see myself. And this is really why I stepped into the work that I do, because it's about me empowering myself and allowing myself to belong.
Right.
And telling myself I should be at that table, and this is the best table. And, if other people want to join me, then it's going to be amazing for them. And if they don't, that's fine too.
Mm-hmm. I think it was Brene Brown who said, if you believe you do belong or you don't belong, you're right.
Yes.
Yes. So you just used your agency, that experience of, I am going to make a difference and do things that are going to work for me. You used your agency to overcome obstacles. And that seems to have been a great strategy. There were some drawbacks to pushing it too far, but the strategy that you used and the way you moved forward sounds like it was part of who you were and who you are. Right?
Absolutely. The pro and the con of it has shaped who I am right now, because I think being driven, it's not just about how much action you take and what you're doing, right? I think that's how people typically tend to measure their success, is how many things have I physically done in a day? How many events have I, been to? How many hours of work did I produce? But really, being driven is a thought, and it's how you see yourself and who you see yourself as. And I think the other part that I've realized through all of these different breakdowns is that rest and relaxation and giving yourself space to breathe is the most productive tool. And actually, that's where your value is created. When you have those boundaries, when you are leading a life that you feel is valuable, and it's not measured by the 60 hours that you put into work in a work week, it's really measured by the way that you see yourself. So that's, I think, a huge part of who I've become today.
Mm-hmm. It's also a privilege for us to be able to even speak like that. We're not living in abject misery in some place in Latin America or in a slum somewhere where there are very few options open to us. I think there are always lots of stories of resilience, but it's something to be grateful for, that we have these opportunities to move forward and that we have agency and that we're not going to be put in prison because we show it or tortured,
Absolutely. Right. I think that is, we have that baseline. I like to use Maslow's hierarchy a lot. And I am grateful enough and to be able to have a space in my life where all of those basic things are met, and I'm safe. I have a place to live. I know that there's going to be food on the table. And, politically, I'm safe as well, that I can make those choices and I can take that time for myself and really have the kind of time and space to explore things that a lot of other people can't, because their basic needs aren't being met.
Right.
So absolutely, this is a privilege and this is a unique situation to be in.
Mm-hmm. So, from the groups you were born into, what has most influenced your sense of self and culture as a leader now? And by that, I mean, you're born into a family, you're born into a region, you're born into an area. You have parents and they may not have been born there. They may have been born in other places. So all of those things influence a sense of self and a sense of culture. So that's what I'm looking at, the ones that you were born into.
So I think the culture that I was born into, the society that I was born into, that concept of like the individual self, Marie, doesn't really exist. It's all about the collective. And so it's all of the collectives. It's the collective of the family. It is the collective of, your like nuclear family, extended family. It is the place that you live in, your country, your nation. And so wherever you are, even if you think about a company or an organization, it's all about the selfless giving and not really being focused on yourself. And so that's something that I strongly learned from being part of the Indian culture, being born into the family that I was. And now at this point as a leader, I've had to overcome a lot of that, right? And so I think there's a time and place for that. And it's really helpful. Again, I think sometimes at the beginning of your career, right, to have that kind of attitude. But as you step into your leadership, it is so important to know who you are, what your values are. And like I was talking about before with the time and being busy, of setting up really strict guidelines for yourself that mean that you have to start putting yourself first, right? And sometimes, not all the time, it can be at, the conflict or, in terms of somebody else's needs. And so you're saying no to things because maybe you need time to rest. And so I've had to do that a lot, is say no to taking on additional tasks and responsibilities because I'm putting up that boundary and I don't want to just not have my individual self and be part of this collective all the time. And so I think it's a balance of, yes, you are part of things that are larger than yourself, but it can't always be at the expense of, let's say, your physical health or your mental health or any goals that you've set for yourself.
The majority of cultures in the world are collectivist, and individualism is a fairly recent development, and it isn't in all cultures. However, there are lots of things to be learned from both of those mindsets. And to feel that you belong to a group that you carry with you everywhere you go because it's your legacy, it's your heritage, that you have ancestors on which you stand, is a very powerful thing because you take belonging with you everywhere you go. But the other side is that it can be groupthink and it can be you don't matter. Only this hierarchy matters or only this person matters. And that's the downside. Whereas with individualism, people learn to understand and to listen more to themselves, but they may, on the other end, become self-centered, and they're not. Self-awareness and self-centeredness are not the same thing. And they may lose the sense that they belong to the human race and that we're interdependent and connected to each other. So those two are necessary. It sounds to me that you have found a way to reconcile those within yourself.
Yes. I mean, I think what I've learned to do, Marie, is further my understanding of where some of these norms and what's said comes from and adapting and adopting what I can. And so something else I think that's really important, you talk about ancestors and where you're from. The other big piece of, my culture and what I've taken with me when I think about collective is also collective in terms of belonging to the earth and to nature and being one with that. Right. And I think that when you see yourself through that lens and not just, I think, through, let's say, a nuclear family or through anything else, that connection with the earth, with nature, with natural cycles, if you think about, when the sun is up and down and the seasons, even having that kind of sense of belonging for me has helped me feel so grounded and a part of something that, as long as I'm on this earth, I belong and I feel that. And that's something that I've learned from my ancestors as well, right? So I think there's all those pieces around the hierarchy and things like that. But that's actually allowed me to be selfish, but be connected and be part of this larger web. So I'm not sure if what I'm saying is making sense, but that's how I've learned to reconcile it, is through that nature piece.
Well, if we can't recognize that we're a part of creation and that the planet sustains life and be grateful for it, then we're likely to do damage. So I think that that particular worldview, which is really foundational to all the indigenous worldviews everywhere in the world, are necessary to heal a lot of the problems we have in the world right now. So I'm glad you mentioned it. a lot of other people that I've interviewed have talked about rewilding and understanding the environment and the ecosystems that they live in and how much that's affected the way they see the world and the way they see their lives. And I think it's all part of that same conversation.
It absolutely is. I think we think that sometimes things are polar opposites and that they are in opposition to each other. But I actually think that this is all part of that same continuum, right? And so it's me as an individual and where do I fit into the world and where do I fit into nature? And then thinking about, my ancestors being part of the collective, but I feel like I'm expressing myself as an individual, but through this world. And so I feel like there is a place for everything on this continuum. And it really helps me feel like I'm not having to completely change my roots and who I am to overcome any of like the hardships that I've had.
And you can't anyway. It's not possible to erase your roots. So I'm glad you said that. So what about groups you've chose to belong to? Because, you started out when you were 11 with all those clubs, but then from there, you also branched out to other things, professional pursuits and education. Those all are groups. They all involve small or large collectives. So what have you adopted into your sense of self and leadership as a result of belonging to those other groups that you chose yourself?
So I think the group that I identify the most and that I've taken a lot of wisdom and learning from at this point is that coaching, that self-development community, because it really helps you focus on controlling what you can and thinking about the changes that you can make and what you can control rather than being hyper focused on circumstances and things that you really can't do anything about that we often feel victimized by. So I would say that is really a community that, I see as like my adopted family and that I really learn so much from. And it keeps me sort of energized and invigorated. And in this phase of my life where I do work for myself and I'm no longer part of a company, it also helps me to feel that sense of community because I don't have a workplace that I'm a part of or an office that I'm going into. And so all of those elements are very, very important to me.
Yes. So temperament and personality, temperament being the way you were born. Well, your people are born with traits. And then they also have the nurturing that goes around it. So not asking you to differentiate between the nature-nurture consideration, but things that people would say, oh, yeah, that's Prerika was like that when she was 2, and now she's still like that. So those are the things that you think are foundational to you. And then personality grows out of how you responded to the opportunities and the obstacles that you faced in your life. So what would you say is temperament? And what would you say you've evolved into personality-wise?
Yeah, I would say temperament, and something that I've heard over and over again is even as a baby, I was very particular in terms of what I wanted to eat, what I wanted to wear. So even at 2 years old, 3 years old, I was very specific and I made sure that everybody knew. And so that is something that has not changed. I continue to be that same way where I am very particular about things that I eat and drink and the company I keep and the clothes I wear. I like to be very, very intentional about those things. And then I would say, in terms of personality, again, growing up, I always thought of myself maybe as a little bit more shy and introverted and somebody who didn't really know how to speak to people. And I would say over the years, really starting with all of those different clubs and activities in high school, going through college, and then really coming into my own, I would say, in the corporate world and having to speak to so many different people, that has really changed for me. And that's, I no longer see myself as a shy person. I really see myself as somebody who can speak to anybody no matter where I go. And it's no longer uncomfortable or strange for me.
You've gained in confidence and your ability to present in different situations.
Yes.
That's great. So can you recall a time when you became aware that your cultural understandings were specific to your culture and not just normal?
Yeah, this is still such a hard one for me because they're so intertwined, as you probably know. But I think one of the things that I learned starting at 11 years old, just going back to that initial story, the neighborhood that we moved to, the area that we moved to, was a very wealthy area. And so, automatically, I think I formed these subconscious or maybe even conscious thoughts about what it meant to be wealthy and, what wealthy people were like. And I think a lot of those associations, unfortunately, were not positive, right? So it was sort of to the effect of, wealthy people are not inclusive and, they're not nice. And that's what it is. And so I think that's another belief that has carried with me, or it did carry with me for a long time. And so there's always this sense of guilt. So there's the cultural norms and pieces. There's a sense of guilt on spending money on myself. Anything that's not education, no matter how much money I made as I continued to have success in my corporate career, I would just never spend money on myself. It was always a hesitation on what was okay, what was not. And I remember the time that it became really clear was I was at the airport. I was traveling somewhere for fun. This was not a business trip. And I needed to get a bottle of water. It was $8. And I was seriously thinking in my mind, should I pay $8 for water? And I'm like, I have to drink something. And why is this such a problem for me? And I think when I started examining that thought and doing some of this coaching work on myself, I realized, this is not normal. There's a lot of people here. They're paying the $8 for water. Something is wrong here. And this is not a normal thought. This is something that I've picked up because of cultural norms and conditioning and things like that, because I have this association around being guilty, spending money and wealth and all of these things. And so I think that's just one of the small examples I have, Marie, of where I noticed this.
Well, what's wrong with that situation is the privatization of water.
That's a whole other podcast. Yes.
Yeah. Which really hit me in between the eyes when I went to Haiti, and people had to decide if they were going to buy water or eat that day because they didn't have money for both.
That's so sad.
Water is a human right, So I think part of you objecting to paying $8 for a bottle of water was not just you saying, this is me not thinking I'm worth it and that I don't have the money and being a scarcity mentality, but also you balking at the idea that this is an unfair thing that's happening around the world where people are being charged for water.
Yes, which everyone should have access to, even if you're at the airport and, you should have brought a water bottle and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That just struck me. I'm also wondering if there is a shock moment. So there are times, and I think if you were talking about wealth, so I'm going to use this one, is when I went to France when I was 19 with my then fiance. And we stayed in Paris with one of his great aunts and uncles. And they had a huge aristocratic apartment with maids and servants. And I had never experienced anybody having maids or servants before. And so there was a time when the woman of the house, the great aunt, wanted to get some salt for her dinner. And she was ringing her bell for the Portuguese maid to come. And the thing is, the Portuguese maid was standing right beside her. And she could have just asked her, could you please bring me the salt? But she insisted on getting up, going and getting the bell, then sitting down and ringing it, at which point the Portuguese maid rolled her eyes in disbelief and asked, yes, madam, what would you like? And she said, the salt, please. And that was a moment of huge shock for me. I thought, I didn't realize that this was how people lived. I guess my normal without servants is not their normal with servants. And the normal of these servants in this position that they're in is not the same normal as the great aunt who has the resources to have several servants and treat them in that sort of disparaging way. So that was a real moment of shock for me. I'm wondering if you have a specific incident where you felt shock.
I guess cultural differences.
See, that was a social class shock for me more than anything else. But language shock, culture shock, the way people do things differently shock.
So I have another one, and I don't know if this is what you're talking about. I know this was one of the questions, but one of the biggest shocks I had here when I first moved to DC is when I got in a cab and someone commented on how good my English was. So I think, again, I mean, this is very commonplace with people who look different, but, that was really surprising to me. And the communication just wasn't going through. I told them I went to school here, I've been to college, to grad school. school here. And they were just like, wow, you don't even have an accent and your English is so good and all of these things. And I'm
And you go,
thinking,
I was born here, just like you. Okay.
so it was just, I think that for me, like that distinction of just still being, going back to the conversation of belonging is, for some people, like again, in their eyes and in their thought, you will just never belong. It doesn't matter. It's just there is this almost like a cover, a sheet, and you just can't get past it. So for me, that was really shocking. And I've been very lucky that I haven't had a lot of these kind of overt instances in my life. But that was one that was very, very shocking to me because I just did not expect it.
That reminds me of an experience that I had where I was doing a workshop with another facilitator who was of East Indian descent, but she was born in Canada. And so same as you, except you're in the US. And so we went to the front desk to the reception and the receptionist asked for our names. And I said Marie and she wrote my name down. And then Seema, who was the other woman, said, my name is Seema. And the woman could not get it. She was like, she can't get it. She can't get it. She was like, how do you say that? How do you spell that? Seema is like really simple. That isn't even her full name. Seema is her shortened version of her first name. So we looked at each other and I said, do you want to try an experiment? And she went, yeah. So then we went back outside and we came back in 10 minutes later and we switched names. So she said, so what are your names and where are you going? And I said, my name is Seema. And she said, oh, Seema. And she wrote it down. And then she looked at Seema and she said, my name's Marie. And she goes, what? How do I spell that?
Wow.
It was just mind boggling. It was the same woman and it was 10 minutes of difference. And it was just that she couldn't see past the skin color.
Yeah, I think for some people, there's like a switch that goes off. And, I think again, for me, it's a cultural shock because I'd like to think that I'm living in, a very cosmopolitan, diverse place. And so you just don't expect that type of thing.
Yeah.
It still exists. And I think it's a good reminder that, don't make any assumptions based on where you live or what you're doing, that these things will come up and, it's good to be prepared.
Yeah. I have since then come to think of the woman who was at the reception that her nervous system was feeling threatened. So she sees somebody who's a skin color that she's not used to seeing, and she goes into automatic fear response. And that's why she couldn't get the name.
Wow.
So we're getting close to the end of the interview. I want to know what would bring out the best in you. So if somebody hires you as an executive coach, what conditions make it the best for you to be at your best?
I think somebody who really wants that change, somebody who's hungry for it, who is ready for something new, wants to take that risk, because a lot of what I'm going to ask you to do during our time together, it's going to be different. It's going to be uncomfortable and there is work involved. I don't just give you the solution as a consultant and say, hey, here's the answer and these are the keys and this will transform your life. There's a lot of self-work that you have to do. And so for me, that perfect client is just somebody who's willing to trust themselves and me and do the work and is just hungry for it.
That's nice. So here's your soapbox moment. What would you like to promote?
So anybody who's listening to this, I really invite you to step into what I call being the CEO of your life. I think this is so important. And, that title of CEO, it holds so much weight in our world. And I would say good or bad, I would love for you to see yourself as that person in your life, that person who has that unshakable confidence, who is really ready to take the risks for the overall well-being of, a quote unquote organization. In your case, it's going to be your life. And that person who puts themselves first. If you think about a CEO's calendar and the boundaries that they have and what they think about themselves, they are in complete ownership and complete identity of owning that CEO, that chief executive officer role in their life. And I just invite you all to do the same, to know that regardless of your title, you have that capability and that strength.
That is a wonderful way of looking at your life. If you think, I am the CEO of my own life, how would that cause me to make different decisions or act differently? I love that. It's a wonderful idea.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such an interesting and deep conversation, and I really value our time together.
Well, I do too. Is there anything else you would like to say?
That's it. And, the other thing is that sometimes when we look at ourselves and we start discovering these patterns and cultural beliefs and thoughts, it can become an unending project to try and fix it and to try to work on it. The other thing that I want to say is that you're not broken. right? There's nothing wrong with you. Everything is, just going well. And it is just about being clear on your focus and who you want to be. But that doesn't mean completely changing who you are and turning into all of this extra work on changing yourself. It's just sometimes getting some support, doing some work, but this should not be an, never-ending project to fix and change who you are. That's not the intention when we think about your cultural roots, what you came from, what shapes your beliefs.
That's a very nice way to end the interview. Thank you so much, Prerika Agarwal, for joining me today on the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. And I wish you a most wonderful rest of your day.
I wish you a fantastic day as well. Stay warm.
Prerika Agarwal is a self-reflective achiever whose drive for excellence and desire to belong became both her ticket to success and her downfall. At age 11, as the only brown face in a sea of wealthy white children attending her Long Island school, she joined 13 clubs and worked overtime on her studies to achieve the grades and find the friends she hoped would be the result of her actions. Fast forward to a successful career in Fortune 500 companies that came with the serious effects of stress on her health, Prerika made the decision to go out on her own as an executive coach. This decision brought her to a community of coaches where she truly feels she can be fully herself while belonging within a group of encouraging and accepting colleagues. I hope you enjoyed this podcast interview as much as I enjoyed it, and I would like to wish you a wonderful day where culture and leadership connections continue to guide and influence your life. Want to show some appreciation? You can buy me a coffee. What? How do you buy a coffee for a podcast owner? Well, there's a way. Let me explain. You go to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. That's spelled MarieGervais. So it's buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. And when you go to that website, what's going to happen is you'll get a chance to click on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 cups of coffee at $5 a piece to help contribute to the cost of the podcast. And yes, it's $5 for a cup of coffee because it's quality coffee for a quality podcast. So I hope you will contribute and you'll help us to reduce the costs of the podcast by going to buymeacoffee.com/Marie Gervais. Thank you in advance for your generous contribution.